and to fast track what we can fast track, with the aim of offering as many renewed leases as we possibly could to community organisations by Christmas. So the feeling we were looking for was that group who's been a little uncertain, are they going to get their renewed lease by Christmas? Yes, it's in their hand. They've got the certainty of knowing their tenure is confirmed. The way we've worked differently there is this has genuinely been a sort of cross-council organisation approach. Our teams across community, across legal, across property and now community facilities department, we formed a real team. We haven't lost sight of the importance of being located in the many places of Auckland, but by working together we've been able to problem solve and re-engineer a lot of the ways in which we work. We've been able to bundle the work together, do common things in the same way, create some efficiencies without losing the nuance of the work and the relationships around our groups. And we've been able to bring in, I suppose, a much greater sense of pragmatism in working with the local boards to get things done, but all the time without losing the focus on alignment and achievement against those local board priorities that guide us. And you'll see there at the bottom of that slide, the targets we set ourselves were to have fully executed all those existing decisions by Christmas and to have completed 70% of the renewals. That's 111 cases by Christmas. And so here's the performance slide, if you like, in terms of lease renewals. What you can see there is on the far left-hand side, that blue column, back in July we had 150 renewal jobs there to complete. What the red columns there show you is the progression towards completion as we move from left to right. So against the target of 111 renewals offered by Christmas, you can see there that we've completed 74, and in terms of executed renewals, we've completed 46 against the target of 50. And actually these figures were as stood on the 25th of November when we finalised the agenda report. So I'm pleased to say that we're now up to 106 renewals offered to the groups, and 59 of those have been fully executed. And I'm actually very confident that by the Christmas break we'll be very close to offering 150 of those renewal cases, because we're really starting to see the productivity of this programme take off. So it's a great news story in terms of those groups having the confidence of those renewed leases. This slide, similar around new leases. You'll see there 309 in total at the start of this year. We've been able to whittle that down to 176 that are still to start. And I'm really pleased actually that we've managed to offer 48. That's actually better than we'd anticipated. This is the area where we've got the complexity to work through, and what that represents is that air of pragmatism, working with the local boards to move these things along and offer those leases where all things line up and everyone agree we've got high performing groups. So I suppose the story is there, the very different way of working, programme approach, but not losing sight of the importance of place, the importance of relationships with these groups, and that alignment and connection to local boards. We're seeing good progress. I'm confident that in the third and fourth quarter we'll see really good progress against those new leases, and by the end of this year we'll be well through that total of 509. So that's a snapshot of the work and the effect we're having in terms of renewed leases and new leases. I'll just hand over now to Bram and Rob just to talk to the activity on reserves work.
Yeah. Well, this part of it isn't so much a snapshot as just a heads up of some issues that we're looking at and to report back to a committee in the new year on. But as
Bram,
part of,
could you just pull that towards you a bit. Thanks
Yeah.
very much.
As part of looking at the renewals program and new leases, one of the issues comes up, of course, is what sort of activity can be permitted on what sort of reserves and parks. What flexibilities do the local board have to make the decisions that their communities want for their local parks? And the sort of issues that we might see come up is, well, can you have a farmer's market? Could you have a cafe in the community centre? Are you even allowed a vending machine? And believe it or not, we spend an awful lot of time between parks, legal and community leasing trying to grapple with these issues that you would think would be fairly simple sort of political decisions for the local boards, but we find ourselves working within a legal framework that in some respects is probably a little bit tighter than we would prefer. And the particular one here is the Reserves Act. Many of our local parks are held under the Reserves Act. One of the main benefits of the Reserves Act is it allows local authorities to administer Crown land as a reserve. So to the extent we're talking about Crown-derived land, the Reserves Act is the framework we have to work in, and until the Reserves Act is changed, we'll just have to do what we can in that area. But a lot of the reserves we have are actually council land that we've chosen to hold under the Reserves Act. So certainly on a case-by-case basis, we have to ask ourselves, is that necessarily the best place to keep that reserve? Should we just hold it under the Local Government Act, which has some similar protections to the Reserves Act, but potentially gives us quite a lot more operating flexibility. I should say at the outset that whether you hold a park under the Reserves Act or Local Government Act doesn't affect the allocations table. It's still a local board decision around what sort of activities they want to do, but the classification issue itself is a governing body one. So, yeah, basically, as we've seen on the overheads, the Reserves Act is relatively prescriptive. I suppose it's an act that came out of a particular time and place. A lot of the act is to do with, of course, conservation estate, and that sort of tone pervades it. So when we get down to a local car park or a community centre or some such, you're dealing with a regime there that is covering a lot of quite different things. We've obviously inherited a lot of different approaches from the legacy councils. Different sorts of reserves are not uniformly classified across Auckland. It will just depend what was done at the time. There are a lot of different tenancy arrangements. We do see some compliance issues coming out of this. Under the Reserves Act, you have to have a reserve management plan. There might be some activities that are borderline as to whether they're permitted or not, and sometimes there are resource consent issues as well. Our approach to this simply is, look, if we can fix the paperwork at our end and let the communities and local boards do what they want to do on those reserves, then that quite neatly solves our compliance problem. But I'm not looking at this from the compliance perspective as such. We're looking at it from how do we enable our communities to do what they want to do on our local parks and reserves. The other point I'd stress is it's very hard to make generalisations about classification issues. Every bit of land is different, has a different history, so it is something where you do need to look case by case. But the basic issue we have at the moment is a perception that holding a reserve under the Local Government Act is not as good as holding it under the Reserves Act, that the Reserves Act gives more protection and so forth. It's certainly more restrictive on permitted uses, but I don't necessarily agree from a practical perspective that it does give more protection. But that's something we could look at if we have the Local Government Act as our domain and we can make our own policies around protection and use in that area, and if we were able to boost those up a little bit, then that might give local boards and communities more confidence in saying, well, maybe the LGA is the best option for this reserve because it will let us what we want to do and we feel secure in doing that. So it's probably a little bit about kicking off a work stream that ensures that our decision makers have some better choices as to what options they can select, what pathways they have to where they want to go, and we propose reporting on some basic options there in the new year. What I'd say, though, to be very clear, is this report is not a report proposing change to any specific reserve or reserves generally. It is just about the LGA framework as such. And I can probably, well, did you want to?
No, I think Brian's coming. I'm happy to answer any questions that come up.
Thank you. thank you very much, because this is an area that has exercised some hours of work with communities who get very angst about what's going on and see a threat to what they've been doing for years. So it was very good to hear both Kevin and Bram, you both used the word enable, word after my own heart. I like enable, but we also have to be nimble, because, you know, it is, as I say, there's some communities are getting really, really concerned, and the time it's taken, and I know the Orewa Surf Club, it's taken, I don't know whether John wants to comment, but I was told the other day, as soon as John and I got involved, things started to happen, but I think it's been going on for far too long, and I think that's one of the problems with some of these issues. So I'm happy to move the report if I've got a seconder, Councillor Darby and Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I really welcome this piece of work. It's long overdue. I'm particularly interested in how the impacts are going to be on the sports and recreational groups. When we went out for consultation on the sustainability of sports, the number one gripe from clubs was leases and what was council doing about it. Obviously, we'll continue, I would hope, to advocate change to central government in terms of the Reserves Act, that there are more enabling provisions, because so many of the activities that are taking place by volunteer groups at the moment are technically illegal. So that's just a silly situation. So I'm hoping that in the report back, which I will welcome in February, is it anticipated? February going to come back?
Yep.
I'm hoping that you are going to help us address some of those issues, and that we can be more nimble. But I think we also need to keep to the forefront of our mind the lessons that we've actually learnt from the codes, the clubs, the challenges for memberships today. We're wanting to see more young people in having the opportunity to access to sports clubs, but the reality is that we make it incredibly difficult for some of them to operate. One of the things that I am hoping for, and I'd like you to comment on, is looking at page, 41, where you're looking at the alignment, the improvement in the alignment. I want to understand that when we get those policies through, whether in the council family, whether it's a local board or whether it's the council itself, that we are taking into account what clubs need by way of tenure to be able to operate effectively into the future. We cannot expect clubs to be making those investments in buildings, to be doing the maintenance and things, if we're just drip feeding them tenure. That is an unacceptable situation, and it's one that we have counted in recent times with some of the leases with local boards. So I'm hoping that perhaps you can comment on that and just explain to me how we'll get that alignment with our policies at the one level, our broader policies, and how that translates to policy. So maybe Rob, you could comment on that?
I'll defer to Kevin.
So through the chair, I'll have the first crack at it, and then maybe Rob can support. So what you see up there, I suppose, is conceptually this programme that we're contemplating. That first phase prioritises really those slides that I spoke to. It's about getting on top of the existing workload, working through that detail, taking away that uncertainty, providing certainty of leases. Actually, we're moving into that organised category there. Actually, we've consolidated some of those improvements by creating one real team now within the organisation, focused just clearly on this work. So we start to bank those improvements that we've developed. Then we want to move on through the remainder of this year to improve those processes, particularly around outcomes planning and monitoring and reporting, so we can see the product of this work, moving towards those policy pieces, if you like. What is that more enabling policy? And through to the review of those community occupancy guidelines. So those guidelines are actually probably one of the first pieces of policy that Council developed, and they've served us quite well, but I think probably everyone involved would recognise that we've learned a lot through the almost 4 years since they were first created, and there's plenty in there that needs to be refreshed. And certainly from my perspective, I often see community leasing, what we're involved in actually is a sort of very practical form of asset transfer that provides security and appropriate duration of tenure to groups, allows them to leverage that tenure to create good in our communities. And so term is a really important thing. Too short a term, and groups have always got that hesitancy and they're not quite able to invest in their activity and their groups. Too long a term, and we risk denying opportunity to other groups who could be emerging within those communities. So I think that's one of the key considerations, that focus on what's the optimum term and what policy tools do we need to support that.
So, Madam Chair, tenure is one point. The second point is the reality of the need for clubs to do fundraising.
Yes.
That when we are bringing more clubs together and encouraging that, bringing codes together, there are some significant costs to that, and they're not costs that council can continue necessarily to subsidise. So I think we've got to be enabling and empowering in terms of clubs for the future being able to be really innovative with their fundraising on activities. That is a real challenge. Fundraising for all clubs is a challenge, but going forward into the future, that is something that we have to play our role in terms of responsibly setting the policy framework that they can undertake those activities and use that space fruitfully to be able to achieve sustainability.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to endorse that. I mean, one half of my team, of course, in commercial is working on the funding tools and helping these groups be innovative in this space. The other half is trying to find a way where we can make the lease work. So I think both of those points are hugely important to making the Empowered Communities Initiative work, that they will need an appropriate tenure that supports or is a platform for whatever investment we would like them to make. And they do need operating flexibility to help manage their own or delivery of the outcomes that we're both trying to achieve. So we are looking at it very much in that light.
So that will come back in February or whenever.
I'll say
probably.
March.
I think the frustration for some communities is they want to get on with fundraising to whatever, but they and as Councillor Fletcher so rightly says, they can't, I mean, they know they can run the thing, they know they can set it up and keep going, but somehow it's this blockage with the lease. It always seems to be the blockage with the lease.
Yeah, and it's something that we're looking at with extreme urgency.
Yep.
Because the workflow issue for us of not getting this right exceeds obviously the
Yep.
work in getting it right. So we.
And Madam Chair, sorry, just to follow on from that is, it then makes it difficult for them to go to other community funding agencies. So whether it's Foundation North or whatever it might be, we are that obstacle whether we like it or not.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Penrose.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Councillor Fletcher's pretty much summed it up actually nicely, and it's probably been a good 40 months since myself and Councillor Fletcher and Watson and Walker and Chloe went around the region listening to the concerns in their parks portfolio, and the one, as Councillor Fletcher highlighted, the biggest concern was around their leases.
Absolutely.
And as we know, and it's been pointed out, that some of them are very complex, the compliance issues, Reserve Land Act, multiple stakeholders, so there are some complexities there, but at the same token there were some smaller leases and simplified leases that I think we could have got onto a lot sooner and dealt with and mitigated a lot of the concerns that we had there. But on saying that, I think today's report is extremely good news to our ears, and a good way forward, and it's all part of the empowering community. So, it's once again, it's empowering those communities, but as we go through the empowering communities, but keep the community well informed of what's actually happening is the key to this as well. So again, I just want to acknowledge the team for this, and Lisa Toka was extremely good.